Hey there folks, Red-Haired Maniac back with you again. Going to talk a little bit more gaming stuff. Got a request to do a little overview of a game called Shadowrun. RPG, it's been around since about, I'd say the early 90s. I want to say 91 if I remember right. 1991 was when the first edition came out. The book I just held up is the cover to the 20th anniversary edition. It's basically 4th edition with errata. There's a 5th edition that's come out since. Basically, a bit of an overview of Shadowrun, from what I can tell. And I'm doing a lot of this from memory because I can't find my 2nd edition book, I can't find my 5th edition book, and I had a 1st edition at one point in time, but I know I sold it years ago, and I never owned 3rd because at the time I just wasn't playing. Shadowrun, for those of you who don't know, is a near-future science fiction setting. Those of you who have heard of the cyberpunk genre, if you're going to look for movies, Blade Runner is probably the top of the list. Scanner Darkly, Johnny Mnemonic, as horrible a movie as that was. Things of that nature. Literature, you're going to look for, again, Johnny Mnemonic was a short story by William Gibson, who is one of the fathers of the genre. He wrote such books as Virtual Light, Mona Lisa Overdrive, Neuromancer, which was a fantastic book. Another guy by the name of Bruce Sterling has written some stuff, although Bruce's main contribution has been the editing of anthologies, one of which is called Mirror Shades. Another fantastic book of short stories kind of set in these dystopian near-future stuff, where corporations have pretty much taken the place of governments. Governments still exist, but they're really just notions on paper. It's really corporations that kind of control the laws, people's lives in general, the workplace, etc., etc. And it's very much a dystopian future of haves and have-nots. And there's very few haves and a whole ton of have-nots. Shadowrun was not the first game in this genre. The first game in this genre was a game aptly named Cyberpunk. Very much style over substance. Art house oriented games, Mike Pondsmith. The first 2 editions of the game were really, really solid. 3rd edition of that game was horrible. I do not recommend it. Avoid it, the plague. If you can find a copy of Cyberpunk 2020, though, grab that shit, mine it for information. Fantastic goddamn set of rules and setting. Where Shadowrun kind of diverges from the path is Shadowrun took this nice concept of, okay, here's this near future, you have this dystopian thing going on, people can start hacking computers with the brain, technology is advancing at a super hyper rate, the virtual reality, which was first kind of explored in Tron, where you get the people jumping into the video games and whatnot, but kind of like that, but different. A lot more cat and mouse, a lot more stealthy, and in some ways a lot more dangerous. Shadowrun took that basic cyberpunk premise and they overlaid fantasy tropes on it. You have magic in the world, you have dragons, you have a number of different races which didn't necessarily evolve from humans so much as the genes were always there, and the magic had left the world, and since magic had left the world, all these races kind of shrunk back into the normal human protoplasm, and hey, I'm a human, you're a human, blah, 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 blah. Magic showed up, people's DNA kind of got reawakened, so you had dwarves and trolls and elves, and a couple others that just, orcs and just some basic fantasy races. That which was actually a brilliant move at the time, because not cyberpunk, but science fiction gaming in general is far outsold by fantasy. D&D is the 800-pound gorilla in the room. The top 2 books that, in terms of fiction, the top 2 sellers for all time are pretty much 2 of the, like 4 or 5 Tolkien books. Fantasy powers the imagination of so many people. Science fiction, mostly because of the science part, doesn't so much. And Shadowrun was brilliant in the fact that let's take this futuristic concept and apply a fantasy template over it, and a wonderful setting was born. And early history of it, and this is something I haven't been able to confirm, but I haven't heard denied either, is that Shadowrun first came to FASA Studios, the company who first created the IP, and there's a long history there where that IP ownership went to after a while. But someone came to FASA with this setting, and they had no rules mechanics for it. And FASA's like, this is amazing. You, random freelancer who's done a lot of work for us, write a game system. You have about 6 months. Maybe a year if we're feeling generous. And they got to work, and they pretty much kludged the game system onto the setting. Whether or not that is true, I don't know. Maybe it was born fully formed as one basic idea where the setting and the mechanics came together, but again, I haven't heard my story that I just conveyed confirmed, but I haven't heard it denied either, and I've heard it from both sides. Anyway, Shadowrun hit, and it hit like a house of fire. The problem was that the mechanics definitely showed a rush job and a lack of playtesting, because certain numbers didn't always add up. It was very possible to build starting characters that could literally wade through a battle zone. And I'm not talking about some small arms fire battle zones. I'm talking about, hey, those guys have a tank. I'm going to walk up and kill it. It's shooting at you. I don't fucking care. Blam, that's neat. Blam, that's even special. It didn't matter. You can literally make impervious combat machines. Second edition cleaned up some of those. You could still make some pretty damn tough people. I didn't see anyone that was impervious. I did see some situations where you could automatically die if you were dumb. We'll get to that in a minute. Third edition, I don't have a whole lot of experience with. Fourth edition is where one of the first mechanical shifts came. First, second, third all kind of started with the base mechanics and kind of modified them and streamlined them. Fourth edition is where a lot of changes were made to the mechanics. They weren't bad. They weren't great. But they worked. In 5th edition, kind of refined those a little bit more. The one thing that 4th and 5th edition did do was they advanced the setting. When Shadowrun was written in 1991, cell phones weren't really a thing, let alone smartphones. Things were still relatively big. If you were going to hack into a computer system, you had to have something called a deck, which was basically a computer keyboard with a computer, with a motherboard kind of strapped to it, built inside the case. You plugged into the machine and you plugged something into your head and you went nuts. Well, technology advanced at a rather rapid rate. The game didn't really push itself from the first 3 editions, so they all kind of kept things the same. At fourth edition, they pushed the technology, they turned futurist, and they kind of like, here's where we think it's going to be. They advanced the setting, they advanced the timeline, and with 4th edition, and especially with 5th edition, I felt there's so much for a GM to keep track of, via hyper-reality, and, well, excuse me, I'm sorry, I borrowed a term from another game, augmented reality, which was, hey, I have all this smart link and, call it effectively Google Glass built into my brain. I can now walk into a restaurant. If I want a menu, I can call one up. It'll be floating in the air as an image. I can kind of order what I want. I don't even have to talk to a waiter. That kind of power in a player's hands will bog a game down. Because you're always going to get some ass clown who's going to go, hey, I want to go to Stuffer Shack. What's the price of potato chips today? And he's going to ask question after question, mostly because he doesn't have anything for his character to do, but he wants to be the center of attention. I wish this weren't true. 90% of the games I've played, there's always one guy who's like that. He's the same guy who doesn't spend his time in D&D 3035 working out the artifacts that he wants to make via crafting outside of game. He'd rather spend 4 hours at the table taking up everyone else's time while he does it. Those people piss me off. Not gonna lie. Anyway, mechanically, first edition and Shadowrun in general was kind of different than a lot of things that had come before it. It was one of the first games to truly use a target number for various successes. It was used all D6s. It didn't use the standard polyhedral set that most people grew up accustomed to with D&D. And you could end up rolling a couple of handfuls of D6s. I was kind of used to it because I'd been playing enough hero system by that time. You know, a bag full of D6s, yeah, whatevs, got it. People playing D&D, what do you mean I need to roll 14 dice at once? I'm looking for what? It happened. Shadowrun's general, you know, for the first 3 editions, and again, third I might get corrected on because I didn't really play a whole lot of it. Didn't read a whole lot of it. Didn't play it at all. You had basically a target number, or a damage number, or a staging number, a damage code, which would be like small, medium, large, and deadly, SMLD. And then a staging number, which would be the number of successes you would need on your dice pool to hit to up ratchet that damage a level. So if you had a gun that was 9S3, it would do a small amount of damage if you hit with it. You're looking for 9s to up ratchet that damage. Say you get 3 9s, because that's your staging number, that would bump that damage from S to M. If you got 3 more, that would bump it from M to L. 3 more after that, L to D. That rarely happened, but it could, especially when you're rolling a handful of D6s, and by a handful I'm talking 15 plus. Your target numbers were, you know, if you had hit a 9, well, roll your bucket of dice, look for 6s. Pick up all your 6s, roll them again, and add them to the original 6. Rolled more 6s, keep rolling. And you took your best roll in each bracket of 9 would count as a success. And if you had multiple brackets, that would just add it to it. But the staging numbers usually went from 2 to 4. A couple of really nasty weapons, I think, were 1, but I think those were rare, hideously expensive, and no one took them anyway because they were just unwieldy. You know, these were things like tank guns. Hey, you got a success? Bump it up a notch. It's already at D. Well, it sucks to be them. Second edition streamlined some of this. They took all the staging numbers down to 2. So it didn't, there was no finding this, how many successes do I need to bump it up? It was just straight 2. And I think third carried that in. And, you know, tasks were also, hey, you need to get your target numbers a 7, which is basically a 6. A 6 and a 7 is pretty much the same. And you 7/3, so you need target number 7. You need 3 successes at 7 or better to succeed at the task. 4th edition, they changed it to what they were looking for as hits, where anything that was a 5 or a 6 was a hit. And I believe, if I remember correctly, if you rolled a 6, you could roll it again looking for another hit. And as long as you kept rolling 6s, they kept adding hits. And you keep succeeding. And if more like half your dice rolled 1s, then you glitched and something really bad happened. 4th edition also took, in character creation, were the first 3 editions. Now I'm rambling, I'm kind of going all over the place, but supper. The first 3 editions used a priority system of like race, credits for gear and cyberware and bioware and whatnot, magical ability, Try to remember there was like 5 priorities, and you like A, B, C, or D, or E. Let's see, skill points and attribute points, and you kind of had to categorize which one you're putting priority in. Priority A was the top row, then B, then C, then D, then E. If you weren't taking magic at all, you could slot E in there, magic and E, and be happy. 4th edition brought a point-buy system, where instead of the priorities, you got a certain number of build points to build your character. I preferred that personally. I don't think they did it well, but they did do it. I prefer it personally because it allows me to customize the character the way I want it to without an artificial constraint. But I'm not going to lie, I did have kind of a neat little of the whole priority chart. And for 5th edition, they brought that back. And for 5th edition, they changed the hits to successes in terms of that, but they kept the 5-6 roll. Can't remember if the 6s get rerolled or not. I like the game at a certain level. I love cyberpunk. I love the genre. I was kind of miffed when it first came out that they were mixing fantasy with my cyberpunk. Very much a purist in that respect, and if you give me the choice between playing Shadowrun and cyberpunk, I'm going to take cyberpunk every day of the week. Why? Don't get me wrong, fantasy's great, but after so many years of playing D&D, I'm tired of fantasy. I want to set elves on fire. Specifically, Driss Jordan, if I ever see you on the street, you're fucking on fire. I will make that shit happen. Sorry, side note, got lost. Shadowrun, though, in and of itself, it's a cool game. It's something that if you have a chance to play it, you should. Definitely play it with an experienced group, at least someone who can walk you through it, because the system is different enough from D&D and some of the other more common systems you're going to find, and especially given the newer tendency to go rules light. Shadowrun isn't. Shadowrun's very rules heavy. It comes with a core book. You can run the game with the core book. It's not recommended. Because there's always all these other aspects that need to be fully explored. They tell you how to work them in the core books, but riggers, which are basically people who plug their minds into vehicles at various forms, vehicles and drones at various forms, and pilot them. That's pretty much character type. Street Samurai, most of those need gear. They're the guys with run around with the street code of honor. They're tanks. They're very vicious fighters. For a non-cyberpunk version of that character, think Miho from Sin City. She's pretty much the quintessential Street Samurai in and of respect of that. Hackers. The magic users, the magicians, mages, shaman, because there's they set the game in Seattle initially, and they took very much of a Pacific Northwest view with the Native American tribes there, and there's a lot of avenues of characters to explore that can't be covered in the core book. And that's probably one of the other things that bugs me about Shadowrun. Is like, you can run it with just a core book. It's really difficult to. You kind of need all those character splats to flesh out the game, and to help flesh out the world a little bit. I touched on ownership and IP wise. FASA Studios originally created it. Well, FASA, after a while, did what very few game companies do. They quit while they were ahead. Jordan Wiseman, Tom Dowd, a few other people who started it. Jordan's dad, I believe Mort, or Monty, I forget which, it starts with M, was one of the financial backers, had a lot of business experience, helped that company grow very quickly, fairly large, fairly quickly. Decided he wanted to retire. So they sold the IP to, trying to think who they sold it to initially. forget who they sold it to initially. Initially, they kept it themselves and they licensed it to a German company called Fantasy Productions, aka FanPro. FanPro was pretty much responsible for the 3rd edition and early 4th, when FanPro either lost the license or kind of gave up on it, and it was taken over by a company called Catalyst Game Labs, who still is doing it. The IP ownership, now I remember, the IP ownership went from FASA to WizKids. WizKids was a company started by Jordan Weisman. You know them now for like HeroClix and Dice Master, stuff like that. Well, their first game was the click dial stuff, Mage Knight. And they also held the IP rights to Shadowrun and Earthdawn and a few other games, and I'll talk to Earthdawn about Earthdawn in a minute because it is connected to Shadowrun, at least cursorily. But WizKids had no interest in producing RPGs, so they would license out to FanPro, blah blah blah. WizKids eventually, I won't say ran out of money, but ran into some problems, and they got bought by, of all people, Topps. Now, when I say Topps, those of you who are children of the 70s and early 80s, like me, you start thinking Topps. The baseball card company? Where the cards with a little shitty stick of gum that basically is pink cardboard, with a little bit of sugar added for flavor, that pretty much flavor goes away in about 2 minutes once you finally get the damn thing soft? Yep, those guys. Topps, in general, has no interest in publishing games of any form, but they bought everything. They licensed the Shadowrun properties to Catalyst. They licensed the WizKids brand to a company called NECA, National Enthusiast Collectors Association or something like that, and they're the ones who've been doing, they do stuff under the WizKids brand, so they're doing HeroClix and Dice Masters and Star Trek Attack Wing and D&D Attack Wing, and I think a couple other things. There's some board games they do in there. So the ownership's had a long and winding road. Talked about Earthdawn. Shadowrun is a dystopian near future where magic has recently awakened and thus brought back, all of these creatures and all of these races. And is what is known in the Shadowrun parlance and the setting parlance as the sixth world. 6. 3 and 3, 5 and 1, take your pick, I don't care. Our world prior to that was known as the fifth world. Mundane, everything, non-magical, up until the awakening happened. Prior to that was something called the fourth world, where magic was back on an upswing and was still in effect. In that world, FASA put out a game called Earthdawn. Some of the races were similar. There were a few races that never returned in Shadowrun. It was cool, a cool fantasy game. Setting was a little darker than average. The one thing that bothered me about Earthdawn was, even though Earthdawn and Shadowrun were tied to the same setting, the mechanics couldn't have been more different. My wife loves the setting. I think it's okay. Personal preference. She's allowed to like what she likes. I like what I like. No harm, no foul. But damn, that is a mechanics fuck of a system, especially compared to Shadowrun. It uses a crap ton of dice. Characters level up in stages. Their abilities level up in stages where basically they're die combinations of like, hey, your target number is blah blah blah, but you're stage 4, so you're rolling these dice to achieve that target number. And it could be a D4 to D4, D6 and D8. Just depends on the step of what your expertise is. It works. I've been told from people who, once you know the system, it's fantastic. I've been gaming for 40 years, and RPGs especially, and I just look at it and go, I just want to set you on fire. Except I like fire too much, and I don't really want to insult it like that. Again, personal preference. If you like Earthdawn, great. Not my cup of tea. I just find it frustrating and maddening. If I'm going to play fantasy, I can find another system to do it better. And if you're going to be associated with something you've already published, use the same damn mechanics. That way they can cross over, like the novels you wrote that allowed crossover. So there's a trilogy of novels that crossed Shadowrun and Earthdawn over. They actually weren't bad stories for game fiction. Yeah, no, mechanically can't do it. There's not even, I don't even remember there even being a conversion document for it. Anyway, as far as Shadowrun goes, it's a great game. It's, especially newer editions, it's harder for a GM to keep track of. Really needs kind of a tighter rein to get people wrangled so they're not asking them 1,000 questions about what's around them in augmented reality. Augmented reality is important. It's an important part of the setting, but it can become overwhelming because players want information. They want as much information as they can. As the GM, you are that window to their information. You need to be prepared for a lot of things. Beyond that, the games are nice. The books are pretty. It's always had fantastic art. The first 2 editions had a Larry Elmore piece, fantastic piece of work. I'm trying to look at the 20th anniversary core set, basically 4th edition 4.2 or 4.25 or 4.1 or whatever you want to call it. Who did the cover on this? Writing, art direction, cover art. Bjorn Hurry. Never heard of him before. But it's a nice piece of art. Actually, it's pretty sexy. And you want to see the original Elmore piece is pretty much on the title page. I flopped the book around, and the original Elmore title art's also on there. It was actually kind of cool and evocative, especially in the 90s. Yeah, no, Shadowrun, a good game. It's a little GM intensive. It's definitely rules heavy. If you like that sort of thing, go for it. It can be a hell of a lot of fun to play. Oh, I suppose I shouldn't conclude yet. The basic premise of Shadowrun, because I've talked about mechanics and the IP and whatnot. Basically, you've got the haves and the have-nots. Well, there's not a whole lot of haves out there. Most characters in Shadowrun are just one step above pond scum in the social strata. You have nothing, you want something. You've got to go outside the law for it sometimes. You're basically in this dystopian future ruled by mega corporations. You are disposable and deniable assets. Hey, we need... Corporation A needs something stolen from Corporation B, but doesn't want to actually be linked to this whole theft, so we're going to, through some intermediaries, hire some random, street criminals to go take care of that for us. If they do a good job, the rep goes up, they get some better jobs, and it's all very much it becomes a show game and a game of building reputation without being famous. And as the world is written, and if you run it, I don't want to say right, but in the mood that the game conveys, especially from about 3rd edition on, you cannot do stupid stuff as characters. If you make a mistake, the world will make you pay. Arrest is the least of your worries. Death will be coming. It got bad enough that most of the groups around here, they had, their normal character types: street samurai, deckers, mages, maybe a physical B&E guy, breaking and entering type dude, riggers. Then they had something what they called the insurance man. Insurance man is one of those guys who's combat savvy enough to, if you get in trouble, he will extract you. He's very good at his job. He is backup support, and probably the most experienced guy you have on your team. He is also the guy that if you fuck up and cause damage for the team, he'll put a bullet in your head just because the rest of the team doesn't want to be associated with you and your screw-ups. Because the world, basically, if you fuck up a job, it becomes guilt by association. Hey, weren't you on this job with so-and-so who shot, 6 people in a homicidal rage because he just wanted to? We don't talk to him anymore. Well, yeah, if you're smart, you don't talk to him anymore because you put 6 bullets in his brain, dumped him on the cop's door, and with a note said, "We're really sorry." So it kind of makes for a really intense game. It makes for players have to change their mindset, because a lot of games, you're a bunch of friends, you're a party of adventurers, you guys know each other, and you go drinking together, and it's like, haha, and we celebrate and we kick the dragon's ass, and wench more ale. And there's camaraderie there. Shadowrun, you're pretty much all criminals, and you're all looking out for number one being you. If you can get some reputation and some credits being with these guys, great. If you can't, it's time to bail and find a different crew. The insurance man pretty much is there to make sure the crew's rep stays good. And if that means he needs to trim off a dead branch, consider it pruned. Makes for a very intense role-playing situation, a lot of drama. You get a little bit of inter-party personal stuff. It goes a little deeper than the party rogue stealing from the rest of the party while they're all asleep, because there's fewer physical things to steal that he would need. Yeah, it can be pretty intense. Right in the hands of the right GM, it's a lot of fun. Hands of the wrong GM, it's not so much fun. In the hands of the wrong players, it's really a drag. But it can be a good, intense situation. And if you dig that, if you dig science fiction, if you dig a little bit of fantasy, go for it, pick it up, it's for you. If you're not comfortable with possibly being non-cooperative with the rest of the players, with the other players, like, I play to have fun. I don't play to have to watch my back from the people I'm playing games with. Or if you're of the I'm just in it to kill Orchard Beer money, with no real thought to what I'm doing and no real thought to the consequences of my actions, don't play Shadowrun. Avoid it like the plague, because you will not have fun. It's not your type of game. Well, looking at the clock, it's about 33 minutes, which is, I think, longer than I've rambled for anything else. Again, if you have questions or corrections or whatnot, drop them in the comments. Until then, Red-Haired Maniac signing off. Peace.